what I'm finding, which is interesting and kind of cool, and I was reflecting on it this morning, actually, is that the flavor of histamine intolerance, which I think is coming from our, COVID experience in the last number of years, is actually moving differently than, mast cell activation or, other forms of histamine intolerance. I'm finding that it's actually responding better and different, because I think a lot of it has to do with the microbiome and the post-COVID microbiome, which we know does heal actually and resolve in about a year. So I think it's a different kind of flavor of histamine intolerance, but I'm seeing so much more of it.
Welcome back. This is the Ancient Health Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Motley, and we have Isabel Smith with us today, and I'm excited to have her. We've been recording for a few minutes, and this is a juicy one. I know it's going to resonate with a lot of people.
It will. On her Instagram feed, on her page, she talks about gut, hormone health, allergies. And with our discussion, everyone, we found out that Isabel, she doesn't just treat light cases, which on her page, she's treating heavy things, but we found out she treats even deeper conditions. And so those are the things we like to jump into and we like to dive into. So Isabel has a great page on IG. And so Isabel, first of all, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. You have a great page. You have such good information, and it's a lot more lively than mine. I wish Courtney always has really good, and I'm saying like very poignant, but also gets to the point and can make it very lively. Mine are never really like that, which I wish they were, but I'm like, I appreciate it though, that you can take all these.
Bring in some extra props. Like you could throw in an animal or
a goat. She loves handicapped goats.
I'm trying to buy him a pet.
I love that.
Isabel? No.
I'm sorry.
No.
I've derailed the conversation already. We're like 30 seconds in.
Yeah, and everybody's on the editing boards like, okay, wrap this up. Come on, guys. But first, when we meet somebody new, we like to find out about them. And the people out there want to know about how you like to operate, who you are, where you're from, what's your clinic like. Can you give us an explanation? And guys, she is a registered dietitian. She has a master's in science, and I'm going to just let her brag about herself in a good way. I'm not saying she's a braggart. She's super kind. You can tell. I'm very humble, and I'll stop babbling. But please let us know about yourself and your story of how you got into health.
So first of all, super happy to be here. Thanks, guys, for having me. Always fun to meet new friends and, get to know each other. That's why we podcast, because it's why I podcast and why I love to be on podcasts, is to just meet and connect. So anyway, I've been wanting to do what I'm doing since I was 11. I'm 35. I'll be 36 in December. We talked a little bit offline about what my sign was. I'm a proud Sagittarius, so I'll just drop that there. But I, was very inspired as an 11-year-old, sitting in a classroom by a dietitian who had an eating disorder, came in and was, talking about how food was medicine and how food was healing. And I just remember sort of being like, oh, like, that's interesting. I've never thought about food as medicine. I'm an only child. I grew up in a household where my mom had terrible endometriosis. And so I'd seen her suffer with like food allergies and gut stuff. And I never really had any of that myself to that point. So my journey continued forward. I got a, bachelor's in health and exercise sciences, and then I got a master's in nutrition communications, and was trained at, one of the top cancer hospitals and in the country and the world. And, and then was like, did a fully clinical, what's equivalent to a residency for a dietitian, stayed on as an oncology fellow at New York Presbyterian Hospital. On the side, doing what was basically functional medicine with my mentors. I worked with a company that basically led long juicing cleanses, which was like very controversial 15 years ago. The company was called Reboot with Joe. Joe Cross, who made the movie Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. He'd had urticaria. And so I worked with him for years and would lead, 30, 60, 90-day juice cleanses with these people who would have amazing results. They were like 1,600 to 2,000 calorie, juice cleanses. So they're not low in calories. We'd add protein. So it was super robust, but these people would get amazing results because it was just like food as medicine.
Yeah.
So, and that was pretty controversial because I was like working in the hospital and like very like Western medicine style, but like doing this like at nights and on weekends, like leading these people through juice cleanses. So I like didn't really tell my, people who are guiding me and, the leaders of the program, because this was like, should this, intern be doing this? But it's really where I learned a lot, because we were doing real nutrition and talking about like vitamins and nutrients and minerals and all that. So I started my practice in 2014 when I was tired of not being able to really help people. I was in the cancer realm at the time, and I was really not able to help people in the way that I wanted to, like when you're working at a big institution and you are helping people who are going through chemo, you're like, well, and I was speaking Spanish most of the day long because I was at Columbia doing a fellowship at the time. In Spanish, would you like a strawberry ensure or a chocolate ensure to help with your weight gain? And at some point I was like, this is basically all I can offer, because I'm not allowed to talk about a lot of things, because, you got to be careful in a big institution, what you say and how you go about it. And I just thought I could help people more. So I started my practice. I left out, when I was done with the fellowship, I was like, going to continue in the hospital. And I was like, I've had now 4 years of doing like inpatient work. Let me just see what happens. And very quickly, I don't know, 2 months later, I was making twice as much money as I would have been making working in the hospital. And I was helping more people, and I was creative, and I was like, well, maybe I'll just continue. And so fast forward, it just continued to grow and expand. So that's a little bit like how I got to like kind of what I'm doing now. It's evolved incredibly from that point in 2014, but it's been a lifelong journey.
I mean, like with the movement, like if you're in the cancer ward or in that area, did you get, this is just a side note, did you get a lot of kickback, or did you get, a little bit of bumping of elbow, like, a little bump from the mainstream medical community when you were there? I mean, did you
a little cancel culture?
Yeah.
I mean, so the cool part was that my mentor, Stacy Kennedy, who I owe a lot of this to, was the lead dietitian for Joe Cross. And she was a Dana-Farber Cancer Institute dietitian. So she was also in this realm. And so she's the person that I worked with in Boston for all those years and would see patients while I was in grad school. I was at Dana-Farber 4 days a week, like most days, most hours of the day in between classes for 3 years. So learning from her, and she was also doing this thing with Joe Cross on the side as well. Yes, I was in the New York realm, but it was also, I was like, I don't care. Stacy's doing it too. You know what I mean? So I was like, who cares? Like, this is real nutrition. I need to keep learning. I need to make sure that people are actually healing through food, because it works. I was seeing people like have these amazing outcomes, right? Just by flooding your body with nutrients. And, I feel like juicing has gotten kind of like a bad rap over time. Finally, I think people are starting to understand that it's really just an incredible way to flood your body with tons of nutrition. And yes, it could be all fruit or all vegetable, and they have two completely different outcomes. But at the baseline, we're just taking food, lots of it, food with lots of nutrients, and squeezing it into a very consumable, vehicle that if you tried to blend it, you wouldn't be able to drink it all. But when we juice it and you still have all the gut healthy, soluble fiber, it's an incredible tool.
Yeah. This is great. I would love to know, because you've just had so much clinical experience. So I love having people that are actively working with people. So what are you seeing right now today? Because we are really in a time where people are suffering, and a lot of people are they're either accessing or they are searching for answers, and they're kind of just throwing things against the wall to see if they stick. So, what is it that you're seeing right now that maybe to you is, maybe alarming or seems to be a trend? Because I'm sure that there are people listening that may be able to identify with this and need to know that they're not alone, number one, but two, that there are places they can go to maybe find answers for this and solutions.
Yeah. We're across the board seeing that, let's say your standard or not so standard, but your gut issue or your hormone issue or whatever your issue was or is taking a lot longer to heal, right? It's a lot more complex.
Wow.
We're having to use a lot stronger treatments. It's not moving as quickly. People are also more fatigued. Their bodies are more run down. Their mitochondria is more depleted. So when you think of our 10 trillion cells with all of those cute little mitochondria that power the cell, being tired, that influences every single function in the body, including the immune system, including the healing element, right? So that's one thing. The second thing I'm seeing a ton of, and I'm like so grateful that this is such my playground, is histamine intolerance. So in 2018, I launched a program about histamine intolerance, and the patient education was just ridiculous. So I actually was like, screw this. I can't even deal. But I've been like loving and living in the land of histamine intolerance forever. And we are seeing more histamine intolerance. I've never seen so much histamine intolerance in my life. And it is coming through in so many different ways in this current moment. What I'm finding, which is interesting and kind of cool, and I was reflecting on it this morning, actually, is that the flavor of histamine intolerance, which I think is coming from our, COVID experience in the last number of years, is actually moving differently than, mast cell activation or, other tough forms of histamine intolerance. I'm finding that it's actually responding better and different, because I think a lot of it has to do with the microbiome and the post-COVID microbiome, which we know does heal actually and resolve in about a year. So I think it's a different kind of flavor of histamine intolerance, but I'm seeing so much more of it.
What are the symptoms of that?
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. That's good.
Okay, because some people might not know. Maybe just explain what a histamine, intolerance would be and what the symptoms would look like.
So histamine is basically a chemical in our bodies. It's involved in so many different functions. It has a really wonderful role. It's involved in digestion, immune system, so much. But when somebody doesn't properly break it down or has too much of it, they can experience a wide variety of symptoms, including, allergies, runny nose, reflux, diarrhea, bowel urgency, bloating, gas, anxiety, hives, anaphylaxis, insomnia, restless leg syndrome. It's basically all the things, right? And so it often gets missed. Another thing, which is definitely on that list that people are seeing, is trouble losing weight, or they might have gained a lot of weight, or they might be retaining a lot of water weight, or they might have new food allergies and sensitivities. So that's the general gamut. And, when you look at all of those potential symptoms on a piece of paper, you're like, well, those don't really feel like they fit together. And they kind of don't, but they're all reactions of the histamine family. And so we're just seeing more of these kinds of things pop up. It doesn't mean if you have these symptoms that you necessarily have histamine intolerance, but if you're like, why can nobody fix my reflux, or why am I having persistent diarrhea or bloating, or you might want to ask your practitioner about thinking about it potentially, because I'm just seeing it more and more and more.
When you were talking about how COVID created a different type of microbiome, with that, is there, I guess, a different type of microbial overgrowth, the bacteria or the flora? So for you guys out there listening, flora is the bacteria that's in your gut. It helps you digest food. It creates enzymes, keeps you healthy in the right amounts. So what are some of the symptoms or the labs that is associated with that COVID microbiome?
Yeah, so we're just seeing, if you were to do a stool test or something, we're seeing that there are definite measurable changes, maybe more dysbiosis or more, inflammation, in the body in general, which often does come back to the gut. There's been some really interesting research studies. I can send you some after we can include in there's a particular one I'm thinking of, and I can't off the top of my head draw which. But what I can tell you about the microbiome changes that come from COVID is they do resolve. It takes about a year, but they do resolve on their own. And one of the places we look when somebody has a lot of histamine intolerance is in the gut. So we might do a PCR stool test, a GI map, check for dysbiosis, check for certain bacteria that when overgrown can produce histamine. What do we do when we find it? Broad spectrum antimicrobials can be very helpful to just kind of, as I say, do some weed whacking. But I'm even finding that these histamine folks are responding, and that's sort of the flavor we're seeing as a response to the microbiome changes. I'm finding more, but they respond well to histamine blockers, quercetin, low histamine diets sort of stuff, we can't live on a low histamine diet forever because it's actually pretty bad for the microbiome. On a long-term basis, it's good because it kind of quiets the inflammation from the overhistamine production, but we don't want to be on restrictive diets long-term because the microbiome loves food variety.
With that though, too, when we're talking about histamine, when in our culture, as it starts to rise and gets, more and more with our foods changing with the toxicity, I love like labs and seeing like results. What are some of like the cool stories? Like you do a whole juice diet or you're doing this cleansing.
Yeah.
Did you see like markedly reductions in like histamine, like, resistance? Did you find those things happening in the labs or in the clinic?
So with respect to like the juicing in general, what we would
like the detox.
like, I don't even know that at that point, which was 2010 to 2013, I don't even know that I was aware of histamine intolerance then. And I'll tell you why in a minute, but we saw people with chronic urticaria, for example, like Joe, clear up. Type 2 diabetes, blood sugar would drop tremendously over a period of time. People would lose a ton of weight. Chronic, autoimmune symptoms, joint stuff, better. Skin stuff, psoriasis, gone. Amazing, amazing things. And I attribute part of that to the amount of fiber. People go crazy with this. Oh, but there's no insoluble fiber, but the soluble fiber, which is what the gut bugs love to eat, right? The stuff that dissolves in water, that's what's left in juice, right? And the vegetable juices. And that's really what powers the microbiome anyway. So people get all hung up on the insoluble fiber in the pulp that you're throwing out, but that's not even really, it's good, it helps. But like the soluble fiber, which is also found in oats and chia seeds and, the pectin in apples and so lots of other places, that's what's left in the juice. So I think the gut microbiome was actually healing by people not eating all these, processed, foods with sugars and all this other stuff for an extended period of time. Plus, we were overloading with lots of nutrients. And I think it was the duality of the two of those things that really led to so much success. Anytime we give somebody a diet that is so much more, nutrient dense, we see our bodies thrive.
Yeah. That's a great point, because I think there's some confusion sometimes around juicing diets and, like you said, the fiber component and maybe just having a really high volume of certain nutrients, but lacking maybe others. And so that's a really neat application. And honestly, like that's what to me really holds up, because I just want to know what works. And that's what most people want to know. And like, you could throw all the studies all you want. I just want to know, hey, did that help Susie down the street? Because if it helped her, I'm willing to give it a shot. I saw how bad she was and the symptoms, and now her skin looks better and she's out walking, all of the different things. So I find that so fascinating though, how much the gut gets, altered by something like a virus. I mean, we talk a lot about pathogen infections and having exposures to parasites and things like that. But something that is not talked about is how you can have a virus or exposure and infection of a virus, and it actually has the ability to alter your microbiome because it has an impact on the immune system. So that to me is like kind of fascinating to think about. And never gets really addressed mostly in mainstream health. Right. Is that something unique to COVID, or is that just viruses across the board?
I think viruses across the board. We see with like EBV and others too, and also, by the way, everybody has a different viral tolerance, right? So some people can be walking around with a super high viral load and somehow their immune system just tolerates it. And some people are super bogged down by even just a few viruses in the system. So I think it depends on, your immune system. Everybody's immune system is different. And then probably, again, we all need to scour this document, which talking about this should have done beforehand, but what I can tell you is the microbiome is definitely affected by COVID. The specific mechanisms, I'm going to send you the research article so you can post it in here. But probably the effect on the immune system is one of the reasons I would suspect why a COVID microbiome is such a thing, because of the way that this virus affects the immune system. We know that. And we know that viruses in general. And again, it's not everybody, right? So it's like not everybody who got COVID had long COVID, and not everybody who got COVID was super sick, right? And I think at times they were thinking that the microbiome had something to do with it, but it's really about the immune system.
Yeah, I want to stick to something that you mentioned earlier about how kind of we've lost some resiliency. So what in talking about healing and, people, maybe it's identifying what it is that their body has some deficiency. And it's like, okay, here's the roadmap, your healing roadmap, and it's taking longer. So
Right.
what is it that in your, experience in your mind that you're like, this is what's different now that wasn't present, a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, that our bodies are up against? Because I completely agree with those trends. I mean, I even feel like personally, I have to spend a considerable amount of time and effort on making sure that our house is super clean and make it like, you have to go to some decent lengths to make sure that your environment and your food and everything else is on point. Like you used to just be able to throw out the ho-hos and all of a sudden you drop 5 pounds. Now you work really hard and you have marginal improvement. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's multifactorial. I think we are in an environment in which, especially here in the US, maybe not in other places, in which the chemical toxicity and the chemical levels in the environment and the food and the clothing and like everything is just on the rise. So I think that there's that. I think that there's like true fatigue from years and years and years of COVID and stress and anxiety and all of that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the way that the COVID environment affected the immune system, not for everybody, but for some that we're seeing with, these chronic infections or microbial imbalances, dysbiosis, et cetera, it's just taking so much longer to heal. And like I said, maybe it's due to the fact that our bodies are exhausted, mm-hmm. I think that certainly plays a role, right? And or multifactorial, our bodies are up against more. We've just been through a trauma of sorts. Yeah. And now we've also got more, antibiotic resistance. We're seeing these bugs are stronger, faster, better, at sticking around across the board when we talk about, bugs and viruses in general. We're just all finding, I was so frustrated earlier in the year when I was like, but the things I used to use, like I'm using them and they're not working the same. And I was like reaching out to a lot of friends and they're like, same, try doubling it, try doubling the length of time. And I'm like, God, that's going to be too much, but it's not. That's the crazy part is like, I used to be super afraid of like, oh, I'm going to overtreat this person, but there's like kind of no overtreating happening. I'm super conscious to like rebuild alongside with treating, but I'm really not as worried about this like overtreatment thing.
Now with the new resistance, like the resiliency, the body's, I guess, inability to adapt as quickly, we're getting more tired. Do you find any prevalence? Like we're talking about microbiome. It's because you treat so many things. I want you to go into like some of the bigger bugs you treat. Yeah. Do you find more of like one bug versus the other? Because I do find that as well. Isabel, like I find like some people come in and there's like higher amounts of strep because they morph and, they're finding that these little critters can actually change shape and size. And it's a little alarming. It's like a sci-fi movie, but what are the things you see a lot of?
Well, I'm super at the moment focused on fungus, actually.
Oh, yes. Please tell us.
On fungus. It's not showing up where I think it's going to show up, but I know when it's present because I know what it looks like in a person, right? And that's what I'm finding. I'm finding there's more fungus among us.
You're such a fun guy.
And I'm finding, I think it's driving more, food sensitivities, bloating, chronic persistence with SIBO, with dysbiosis, with whatever. That's one thing. Finding more H. pylori.
Yes.
More H. pylori. And not that it's more resistant, but I'm finding that it's just, I'm finding it more. I'm finding low levels of Akkermansia a lot. I love my friend Akkermansia. I always, it's funny, whenever I get a new stool test result, I'm like, come on, give me some worms, give me some worms, give me some worms. Yep. And they never show up. They never show up on a test.
Yeah. They're very, very rarely there. Yeah.
I know. I'm always like, come on. And they never show up, but I know that they're there, again, like with the fungus, the parasites, I tend to actually go through the bacterial and the fungal piece first. And then like, once I've like maxed myself out on like, okay, now it has to be parasites, I don't typically jump into parasites first thing, especially if I don't know
Okay.
somebody and it didn't show up on a test. And I've had some patients get frustrated with me. And I'm like, look, I'm not going to treat you for parasites unless I'm sure that they're there, right? Because the treatment's kind of unpleasant. And I don't want to throw 1,000 things at you, as we were talking about before, right? I want to be sure of the things that I'm treating. Fungus is a little bit less of a dodgy bullet than I think the parasite thing is, especially with what we have to use often for the parasite treatments.
Yep.
So I typically will use something that's microbial and antifungal and see what I get and see what the symptoms are. But those are the things I'm finding. Really the fungus, the H. pylori, low levels of healthy commensal bacteria, really mostly.
What do you find that seems to be like, what are your go-tos as a practitioner that you're like, this is, not that anything's really a silver bullet, but you have seen has been really effective, or even therapies like tools for people, because, it's so individual, but a lot of times, like we talk a lot about using herbs and we use them personally. And so I'm always asking, she
uses herbs by the handful, Isabel. It's not like I just use them no.
Yeah.
4 or 5, chuck them down. Let's go.
I do not follow dosing guidelines, which has not, I can't say that it's benefited me really. I mean, most of the time I'm like, I feel terrible afterwards, but anyway, that's just.
Yeah. What are your go-tos? Like when you find the H. pylori, do you have certain herbs that you find? Is that what you're asking? Like,
like what's the go-tos?
So for H. pylori, for example, I like to not blow somebody out of the water until I have to, right? So I don't start with the biggest guns, and I actually require my patients to be very consistent with me. I don't let them roam very far when I'm doing this kind of work. I'm with them weekly, and I'm like, we have to adjust. I want to make sure you feel well. We use more binders, blah, blah, blah. I don't like to torture my people. I find that life is hard enough. And if somebody's experiencing some discomfort from die-off or whatever, I want to make sure that we are addressing that. So Mastic gum is a very happy go-to for H. pylori. It's a very nice job. Again, anybody listening, do not do this work alone. Please work with somebody. Yeah. This is very, very, very heavy duty work, and stuff comes up that you're not expecting, especially when you're doing it yourself. Please.
What I think a good thing too is like, these are great because a lot of times people will go in and they'll work with a specialist and they'll be like, oh, you've got this, so here's the antibiotic you should take. And I'm like, no, sometimes you have to go to, if you're not working with someone that's very functionally minded, you need to go and say like, hey, I've heard about Mastic gum for H. pylori. What are your thoughts? Like, they may need to go do a little digging and work, because most likely if they're not used to using it, they don't know what but like,
work with them if they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Like I would suggest those people who are listening, if the practitioner is not really willing to listen to you, maybe a good sign that it's not like the best fit. I mean,
you want somebody who's doing this work all the time, because we know what to expect. And I'll talk a little bit about mold next, because I do a lot of mold work, and that's really nuanced, and people I see all the time are trying to do it themselves. But back to H. pylori, Mastic gum, I will often then go stronger if I don't feel like it's resolving. But honestly, with enough time duration and enough, amount, it definitely works. And I've seen a lot of like really good outcomes with using Mastic gum. Sometimes I'll use like a combo. I love combos. I very rarely use single herbs, honestly. I generally use multi-herbal tinctures. I find they're more well tolerated and they are more successful. I got to be honest, my OG favorite is Biocidin. My OG favorite.
Oh, yes, she's
your best friend now.
I swear, I'm like the Biocidin ambassador. I
love that.
I use Biocidin. I actually used it on so many clients, and it honestly goes with me everywhere. And I'm like, nothing sneaks by Biocidin.
Nope, it doesn't.
You know what? It allows me to titrate somebody up really nicely. Yeah. I can account for sensitivity. We go slowly. We see how they feel, blah, blah, blah. So that's like, I had periods where I was like really using Biocidin, and then I was like, maybe there's something better. So I dabbled, and I was like, no. Biocidin. Biocidin is definitely like one of my most favorite go-tos, because I know it will catch a lot of stuff. And it catches a lot of stuff I don't see as well. And histamine intolerance responds incredibly well to Biocidin. I get a lot of really good success. And I get a lot of people who say I'm allergic to walnuts. Can I use biocidin? Honestly, 9.5 times out of 10, the answer is yes. And I have people try it on their skin first, or I have them check with their allergist, or they do a challenge with their allergist. And like, again, like 10 out of 10 times when they do that, it's fine.
Yeah.
Other than that, I've been using on the SIBO folks, I've been using a lot of Candibactin because the research is really good. You know, it lines up with the Xifaxan, and I will also follow people up who've been on Xifaxan with Candibactin.
Okay.
I'm doing a lot of follow-ups on that. I love Cellcore. Cellcore is also, you know, parasite friends and excellent for binders. I use a lot of their binders for a lot of their stuff. And then of course, you know, the fungus stuff, you know, for fungus, I use a lot of Byron White.
That's what I was going to ask you. Which tinctures do you like the most? Because I use some Byron White too, but do you like that for for across the board?
So if we have people who can't tolerate the capsule, we'll do the Byron White, you know, H. pylori formula. But I honestly find that I'm so consistently finding that Mastic gum does a good job that I almost just always use like the Jarrow simple Mastic gum.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll use Bio HPF, you know, Biotics if I need something stronger, but like 9 times out of 10, I don't, because I also will get somebody started on Mastic gum and then I'll layer in, let's say the biocidin or something else, and that'll help to back me up as well. You know, in my efforts to eradicate, but I'm using the biocidin for what's downstream, but it'll also help me with what's upstream. And the biofilm, I'm finding, you know, biofilm disruptors super important. And what I like about biocidin is that it does capture some of the biofilm. Again, one-stop shopping, which I love. Research Nutritionals is great. They have a great biofilm disruptor, like them. They've got great products. I'm super obsessed with this company called Biogenna. You guys heard of Biogenna?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I had a friend of mine 3 weeks ago talk about Biogenna at a conference, and I was like, well, he showed me a couple things, but can you inform us? Because I like to learn more about them.
I just think they're a super cool company. So they have the 7 salt magnesium that basically has all the formulations of mag in one fell swoop. And why that's cool is because, like, no matter what your pH or no matter what, you know, the environment is, you're actually able to absorb. It's amazing. They also have a formulation called telomere support, which I adore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like got green tea extract, resveratrol, broccoli sprout extract, and a couple other goodies. Super, just like good antioxidant, like general support, which again, also helpful for the microbiome. Those are the only 2 I've really like dove into really deeply with Biogenna, but I just really like them. So I'm going to be doing more digging on them.
I gotta look that one up.
Definitely. I mean, because we talk about, like, when we're talking about fungus and how you've gotten into mold, like, I think that generally, like, most people out there may not realize that we're going to kill off parasites. And I love the fact that you said, okay, I'm going to go after fungus mold, because, you know, when you look at mold, I always say it's like a shower curtain, and they produce such bad goo. I hate to use that term, but it is. And so I find a lot of times with patients, and we find, like, when we work with people, that if I really concentrate, like you say, like on those heavy hitters, like you're saying H. pylori, which I need to pay attention more to. And then, but if I start cleaning out more candida or mold fungus out of the system, I find that they do release a lot more of their parasites if you initially go after them as well. So that's a great insight on that. I mean, so would you suggest that if a patient or a person comes in, they're listening to what we're saying, because this is great knowledge, and they're like, okay, I got those symptoms. I have histamine. I had and we're like, okay, calm down. It's good. So we're going to go after the yeast, right? We're going to go after yeast. Is there like a particular test? Because I mean, majority of people are going to have some yeast issues, and I'm not trying to get off track, but is there a testing that you like for yeast or candidas that people can finally get cracking on this? Because I love biocidin. Now we're going back to this. Don't worry, but I want to hear a test.
It's really hard to find the fungus. This is why, and I say this, you know, for a long time, I lived in New York State. And you can't do functional medicine testing in New York State.
What?
Yeah.
You can't send blood. Is it a blood specimen that you can't send? Like, or is it just all?
You can't sign up as a practitioner for Vibrant or GI Med. You can't do any of it. So I had to become extremely astute at clinical judgment treatment, because for a long time, I didn't have access to. So this is where working with a super seasoned practitioner comes in handy, why it's incredibly important, because there will be a lot of things on a test, some of which need treatment, some of which don't, right? As you guys know, there will be a lot of things that don't show up on a test, right? That we infer through symptoms, what is showing up, what their history is, what they've been exposed to, right? Maybe sometimes I'll use a mold test to actually confirm fungus presence, because I'll find that gives me more insight than the stool test does. I mean, I can speak for myself. I had raging candida and it literally showed up nowhere. I had like maybe 2 years in a row, my gynecologist be like, you having any like yeast symptoms? And be like, no, not at all. Because there was like a tiny bit, but I was completely filled with yeast and fungus from mold exposures and from being on ADD meds for a million years. And it showed up nowhere. Finally, 4 stool tests in, I got a little bit of fungus to show up, but that was after I'd actually done 8 months worth of candida work. So what I can tell you is that, is it going to show up on the stool testing? No.
Probably not then.
I've started using the gut zoomer. I find it's more extensive. I don't know that I like it better than, diagnostic solutions. I don't think I do, but sometimes I'll have people do a side-by-side. I actually have a patient right now. I'm having her do both tests.
Oh,
Right? Like, yeah.
I love this. Yes.
Resources allow, I will do it. That's not the usual, but I know this person well and she's willing to do both. So I am just psyched because I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison of them. Me, the scientist who feels like
that's gonna be great.
Christmas morning. It's Christmas morning when we get these tests back. But maybe over time I'll be able to tell you that I'll get more fungus back on the gut zoomer. I don't know, but again, I infer a lot of times, and if I'm not sure, I'll use something, or if I suspect, I'll use something that will catch the fungus. And then as we start to see the symptoms get better, I'm like, oh, there it is, So
with that, so we found a little bit of yeast, and like myself, like my mom had chronic yeast. That's one thing I have to work on. And me and Courtney, we talk about everything: parasites, yeast, mold. We're buds. We just talk about these things. But is it because you think that some yeast are, I guess, evasive? Like for instance, like I wouldn't find a lot of the quote like lab signals in my labs a long time ago, and then the more I knocked it loose, it seemed like I would find more. So I think people like how it can stick to the walls of your intestines and such. And I got one of those black light or not black, like the dark field microscopy, where you use you get your blood and you can look at your blood. And the practitioner Isabel was like, I got up there and I was like, what are all those things squiggling across the and they're like, oh, she's like, oh, those are parasites. I was like, what do you mean they're parasites? And then she said, hey, if we go back here, look at, there's glucose and I tried not to eat too much sugar. She goes, but no, she said, look, that's all yeast on the outskirts of it. And I started going after that. I was like, that's a lot. That's a little too much. And that would explain why when I would eat I ate some more rice back then. Yeah. But as a runner, I'd start eating those foods and I start to feel like your skin itch and you start to feel like the mobilization. And I didn't want to take over the conversation, guys. I'm just saying No, it's a matter of knocking that stuff loose, right?
Good segue into the fact that the diet matters so incredibly for anybody with yeast candida, and I avoided it myself. Not that I'm a super carby eater, but I love my dessert. Don't get me wrong. And I avoided really, really making the dietary changes I needed to make until the very last minute involved in my own story. And I saw the biggest difference of all once I did.
So that's removing. So for yeast, if you're listening, feeds on sugar. And so, I can definitely speak to this. I mean, because I've just recently, I'm bringing it up everywhere, Chris, but I've been tracking macros, which I have not done in a very long time. And it's just kind of like a little isolated, like, hey, let's just figure out exactly. Cause I eat really well, but I really don't have any clue, like protein, all that stuff. And I gotta be honest, for the first 2 days felt terrible. And I was not limiting carbs by any means. My goal was about 115 grams. So I was getting plenty of carbs, but I thought I was dying. I was so hangry. I felt like my body was like screaming at me. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is not a good sign. So you find out real quick that you are a sugar burner, but a lot of it because there's a demand on all of the, these things that rely on it. So, when you get the brain fog and you're like, I'm tired and my joints kind of hurt and I'm like moody and irritable and I feel like I just cravings. I mean, I was like, I do not feel like I can get full unless I eat like a potato right now, So anyway, that's just to say that it can sneak up on you. And it's so, even with a clean diet, these things can be present. We've all just talked about how we've all experienced it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, look, my story includes, mold and candida and Lyme and babesia and new anaphylactic allergies and all sorts of things. So like
Wow.
You've been through it.
Yeah, when my clients are like, oh, but it's been 6 months, when is this going to be over? I'm like, honey, I'm going on 5 years. So
Yeah.
sit still and let's keep going. Or if you don't want to do it and I literally said this to a client this morning. She's like, oh, but it's been 8 months and I'm really suffering. And I'm like, but you're so much better. She's like, but I'm getting so tired of treatment. And I'm like, okay, if you want to stop now, it's all going to regrow, up to you, but I wouldn't stop. You're so much better along. And she's like, I know, but, and I'm like, I don't really have much sympathy for you because I'm 5 years in and I'm still sitting here doing the work. So.
Oh, I'm with you. Okay. So, story. So I had Lyme, I had babesia and Bartonella pretty bad. And, I went on a recent trip with my mentor to Japan, and he's Dr. Leibowitz. We do Supreme Nutrition products like at the office, and he was doing some muscle testing on me, and he said, and he's just a really cool guy. I mean, he's an older gentleman, but he like knows his stuff. Yeah. So he's like checking, and he says, hey, you could go get tested, but he goes, I think you still have some babesia toxins. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And he says, and you got a bit of candida. And he just said, and he was pressing these acupuncture points. I was like, yeah, it hurts there. So for anybody out there, when they're listening, I go, well, he gave me Chinese skull cap, which is an herb. And he gave me some Malia, which is neem. And he says, well, just take this and we'll see how you feel in the morning. I think this will be good for you. But like, as Courtney, you were saying about going through the trenches with individuals, I had really bad Lyme, guys, like when I was 31, 32, and that was years ago. And it's like, can those things stick around? And they can. And that night I got up and I felt like my body was going through like a good rigor mortis because I felt my gallbladder draining, in the middle of the night. And I was like, I think I'm gonna have a whole body cramp right now. And I just sort of said, breathe through it. Cause I know, you can herx a little bit. So I get up the next morning. And everybody out there, whenever you have chronic joint pain or chronic arthritis or something like that, my knee always would bother me, walked almost 12 miles, no pain. Amazing. And he was telling me, he goes, like you just said. So he said, if you get rid of the yeast, start killing it off, he goes, you're going to help with the babesia. And I have, my vision's even gotten better from it. But it can't stick around, right, Isabel? I mean, it can be on for years. I mean, with your clients, right?
Oh my God. And with myself. Yeah. I think this has been going on in my body for a long time. Mm-hmm. Yes. It can stick around for a very long time.
Very. Do you ever find, I mean, both of you guys, I'm asking, like whenever people can get discouraged when they work, we try to get it done as quickly as possible. Like
totally, of course.
And then I always try to think about myself too, like in the story, I was like, man, I had to stick through it. And you're going to have to as well, lovingly to people that when they come in. But I don't think that we ever consider how much time it took for all that stuff to actually accumulate in our body. And our body was so good at trying to heal to keep us from feeling the symptoms, Yeah,
exactly right. And I think we often probably ignored the symptoms until we couldn't, right? And I think if we hadn't ignored and we actually stopped and listened, we'd probably get out of, the ditch faster, sort of thing. Yeah. But I think our bodies are trying really hard to do the best that they can. They really are. And I think, I think we have to remember that, we have a soul, we have a body, and it depends on how you think about this and whatever, but like our bodies are doing the best job that they can to try and keep up with what we're asking them to do. And they're struggling just as much as we are, right? Like the body is like as much as, and I think for me in my own journey, I was really like, I gained 20 pounds like overnight basically and did nothing different. And I was so mean to myself and I was like so down on myself. And I wish I had more photos from that time, but I wouldn't take them. And I just remember like, the days and the saying things to myself. And then one day I was like, oh my God, my whole body's listening. Like I can feel it. Like I can feel when I'm mean to myself. It's like I'm insulting like a million minions, right? And they're just like, whoa, 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 and like,
Oh,
and like, it totally changed like everything for me when I realized like my body actually did have my best interest in mind, and that I was, like showing up for all my clients and Instagram and everything, very like trying to pretend like nothing was going on, but like I was super suffering. And then when I started to be nicer to myself and be like, wow, like actually like she is responding, like, and she's hurting just as much as you are internally, Isabel. Your soul, you're miserable about this, but your body is too. It changed a lot. And I think that there's a super important reconnection experience to our bodies, because I feel like sometimes we can feel really far from them, even though we live in them, during these kinds of experiences. And I think, there's a lot of beauty that comes out of the healing process. And I think for anybody listening, it's really my mission is really on my Instagram is to like really just help to inspire people to sit in it and work on speaking up, finding practitioners that they jive with and that, they resonate and trust, and just keep moving forward, because once you give up, like what is there? What is there? Is that an option? I mean, I know sometimes it feels like you want it to be, and take a break and take a pause and give yourself a rest, but like, do you really want to give up?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And the journey doesn't have to be terrible either. I mean, it
Right.
can feel terrible in moments along the journey, but I think it's when we, like you said, the mental aspect of how you frame it is really what's going to matter. Because if you look at it as, well, I have limes and mold toxicity and I, yeast, and I got a parasite, here's all my things, like dump them out on the table and just stare at them and stew in it and be sad and depressed about it. Or it's okay, I have these things, but I'm working on this one. And like the next day, hey, I have a win. I actually feel, look at my skin. It looks a little bit clearer. It looks a little brighter. And you've got to speak that over yourself. Like the power that has, just like you said, I completely like empathize with you on that, because I've been there too. And I'm so hard. And I'm like, my self-talk, if people knew what I was saying to myself, they would be shocked. Like, but we all do it, right? Like we would never verbalize that, because we would probably be embarrassed of how poorly we actually spoke over ourselves. And I think the more, like you said, you're 5 years in, same, I'm like, 8, 9 years in, but I will say the more I learn and the more wins and like small milestones I hit, I'm like, oh my gosh, that worked for me. Like my body responded positively to that. It empowers me. It feels good. And then I can do better because I understand the tools a little bit more, I understand my body a little bit more. So I think that's what's so cool about like what you do too, is really not only like walking with people through it, but teaching them along the way, because they start to have a new appreciation. Like you cannot hate your body and also be showing up and trying to nurture it at the same time. Like you're in one camp or the other. And until you get on the playing field and get on the same side as your body, that's where you can really tap into a different level of strength that allows you to accomplish that healing.
Oh, I'm with you guys. I think it's a different mindset when, as we get older, like having a knowledge base. I think that when you go through suffering, and our hearts go out to our, to the people we work with, and we know that we've gone through it, but it's like the old adage, it's like where they did the experiments where the trees that were consistently getting in the highest winds in this one desert, they would have the deepest roots. And I always feel that, I would rather in my life work with a practitioner or myself. And then towards the end, if I go to the hospital and they say, you got this, this, and this, I'd rather have a knowledge base and saying, I think I could work with that naturally, because it gives us so many good options, as we learn through our suffering or learn through the hard times. So I wish that more and more, like you say, negative self-talk. I wish in healthcare, which I don't ever see it coming, but more positive talk and more ideas, because, Isabel, like whenever a person comes to you, goes like, well, I don't know, doc, if I'm feeling better. And you go, your skin's glowing, your eyes are brighter, you losing some water weight, your blood work shows that 3 or 4 of these signals are actually going towards the mid-range. But we're so trained as a culture to just like, it's always half empty. And as a practitioner, maybe I'm trying to take a different route, but working that, how do you handle as you go through this? Because you're going through your own journey. Is there like tips you give to people? Like, do you have any type of things that you do to ground or to try to help heal in that area?
Yeah, look, I make sure that I make time to slow down. I start in the morning with a walk. I allow myself to sleep in a little bit if I need to. I like really listen to my body. If I plan to work out and I'm not up for it, I don't do it. I sit in my sauna bag or my, Therasage with the red lights. That thing has been a game changer. Meaning, gosh, love them. Meaningful connections, spending time with people, passion projects, like all of that, like my hobbies, what else I do besides work really helps me, really helps me just sort of be more well-rounded, helps my nervous system to be a part of the healing journey. And I think that's important. We can't heal if our nervous systems are not in a place or starting to be in a place at some points in our day where we can heal.
That's so good.
This has been like really a very eye-opening, because I like how we covered ground in the aspect of taking like yeast or mold or fungus and saying that's a backdrop. This could be another stepping stone for other infections to build up. Then you have negative mindset or negative talking over yourself, and like the congruency of like it all being together. But the cool thing is, like Isabel, like on your page, you're showing us like through steps. I mean, the journey can be a little hard, yes, but there are some, I say, simple steps you could take to start the journey. And that's what I love about it. It's like, we were just discussing that. It's like, man, we could tell everybody like the hardest thing to do is like, we're the practitioners, like that's our job, is to like learn what we need to do, but give you simple steps. So could you tell us and tell everybody out there, like where they can find your information, like what's your website, what's your page, and then the things that you like to focus on in these areas?
Yeah. So, IsabelSmithNutrition.com and Isabel Smith Nutrition Instagram. Like I said at the beginning, you will find that we do a lot of like gut, hormone, allergy, mold, but truthfully, we do pretty much everything behind the scenes. We do eating disorders, we do all sorts of stuff. And we really like to look at the whole person and the whole picture and think about ways that we can up-level healing in a way that works for each individual. It's not the same for everybody. We don't have a one size fits all. And we find that that's really important in actually getting people healed.
I love it. Man. I mean, it's great. These conversations, especially like, because here's the thing, a lot of people, I know myself, I had a hard time figuring out who I could trust. So I love what you're doing and how you take this whole body approach. And I think that you're an excellent resource for people, especially if they feel like they've been dismissed by so many people and they've got those hidden infections, those things that just keep them stuck. And they're like, okay, I keep buying the supplements and I got the water filter and I'm doing all the, earthing and grounding. I'm sick. Like I can't get better. You've got to outsource some help, and you've got to get somebody that can meet you where you're at and really acknowledge that, hey, you're not crazy. These are real things that you're feeling, but know that like, hey, it's going to be a journey, but we're going to walk through it together and we're going to take it one step at a time. And so I hope if you're listening and maybe that's you, that you can reach out, because I mean, Isabel and her team are phenomenal and they're great with those complex cases. We talked about it, like, I think before we started recording, but that's a lot of people. They're in that bucket where it's multifactorial. There's a number of things at play. And then you threw in something like COVID and it was like dropping an atom bomb. And all of a sudden people are like, what happened? Like, I can't recover. So that is such an important thing to realize. I love that we even brought up the point, just it's taking people longer to heal, because maybe you just need a little bit of hope, and hopefully you take some hope that it's like, it's not just you. That is something that's universally like you are seeing as a practitioner. So. Oh yeah, I totally agree. I think that the more we see how you were talking about is about like food is medicine, and just in this where I can feel like I'm trying to like over explain, but literally like we call it the alimentary canal for everybody out there is listening, like literally your guts. And all the tubes connected to your gut are made from the same type of cells that literally form your lungs and your kidneys and the thyroid and the palate and all this. So there's a resonance within your digestive system in the gut. And I mean, you affect the gut, you affect all your organs. So that's how important this is. And Isabel, we're so glad that you came on with us. Hopefully have you on again sometime if you're ever interested. So we're just glad that you came on. So, so you're out in Connecticut.
Yes.
We're out here in Tennessee. and she's in Carolinas, but she gets to join me today in the studio here.
Here we are.
It's fun times, but really, we're so thankful that you joined us today, and thank you for putting out that information for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel.
All right, guys, take it easy. From us here at the Health Institute Ancient Health Podcast, Josh Ack says his hellos, and we'll see you next time in the next episode.